Hello there, my name's Martin Wilson and I am a Detective Inspector with the North East Business Resilience Centre. What is phishing then? Well, email phishing is social engineering in email. So social engineering is the psychology of how we trick people into doing something and we manipulate people into doing something, and we're using emails to do that. Now, it's hard to believe that the very first phishing email was sort of recorded in 1995. And who would have thought in 1995 it would have become this huge monster that it is today? You know, it comes with a huge financial cost. We're talking millions of pounds in losses when phishing emails attack organisations. I was reading something recently from the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey, which is the survey conducted annually by the UK government, which said that 86% of all cyber attacks begin or involve phishing emails. That's a staggering amount. So it's really, really important that we do what we can to mitigate this attack vector. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we need to understand what they are. So you can categorise phishing emails into three categories: phishing, spear phishing, and whaling. And it works like this. The analogy of the angler casting his rod and line into the sea or the lake and catching a fish. He's not bothered what fish he catches, he just wants to catch a fish. The same is true in emailing, where sometimes the bad guys just indiscriminately send out emails to as many people, as many organisations as they possibly can. And it's not particularly targeted towards anybody. I've seen examples of that within the North East, where emails have reached companies, they've reached the company secretary, it's come from an unrecognisable email address. Its simple heading of the email is invoice, and has no text in the email, and it has an attachment that says invoice. That's a good example of a untargeted phishing email. Spear phishing, well, if you think about it, that's where the fisherman is going for a particular target or a particular individual fish. And in the email phishing world, what that means is that the bad guys have done some work, some research, they've had a look online, they've tried to see what information is out there to craft an email which looks more genuine, that looks like it's come from somebody you trust or has information about you in there, because you're more likely to be manipulated into doing what it is that they want you to do with that email. Whaling, same principle as spear phishing, whaling, but what you're doing is you are targeting an email, a phishing email, to the senior person or persons within an organisation. And think about it. Why might you want to target those senior people? Because if you can compromise them, you're much more likely to be able to use their leverage and their influence within an organisation towards your malicious means. What I should say is that a common technique that a lot of the bad guys use for phishing and spear phishing is what we call spoofing. In other words, they will make an email look like it's come from an email address that you trust. So they can sometimes clone that email address. It's what we call spoofing. So irrespective of whether it's a phishing, spear phishing or whaling email, they're going to want you to do one of three things. They're going to want you to click on the link. So the email, within the email itself, there'll be a link which takes you to a web page. And just by clicking on that link and going to a web page, sometimes you can get what's called a drive-by download, or malware can download from that website onto your computer. They may want you to open an attachment in that email. Why do they want you to open an attachment? Because by opening an attachment, sometimes there can be malware sat in there, and that's how malware gets onto our systems. Or lastly, they'll want you to divulge some personally identifiable information. So they'll try and trick you into giving your banking passwords, your date of birth, information which is valuable because by having that information, like if you told me certain things about you, I could potentially go out and open up a bank account in your name. Let's have a look at the psychology then. So these are the tricks and manipulations which they try to employ to get us to do one of those three things. Now, the diagram on the slide deck is not a definitive list. There are more cues, if you want to call them that, out there, but I've just picked out the ones which may apply in the workplace. Authority. Basically, I'm going to make the email look like it's come from a trusted authority. Police, government, NHS. Why? Because we're more likely to do what the police, government, NHS, etc. ask us to do. Urgency. I'm going to craft an email that says you've got to respond to this and you've got to respond to it by a certain time, ramping up the pressure upon you. Loss. If you don't do what I'm asking you to do within the email, you're going to lose something. So some phishing emails I've seen look like they come from the IT department saying, we're just doing an audit of our IT services. We need you to fill in the attachment or open up the attachment to confirm that your account is active, otherwise it will be closed. It's a good way when you think about it of trying to get people to respond to that phishing email. Reciprocity. I will look to leverage a favour from you. I'll try and personalise it in some way, try and pull on your heartstrings. And scarcity, so you've got to respond to this now because it's a limited offer. You might be thinking, well, some of these are sales techniques. I'm not salespeople are behind phishing email campaigns, because they're not, but the techniques that they use, the bad guys have taken the time to consider what techniques are out there and how they can use those to leverage influence upon you. And don't just take my word to it. Don't worry if you can't see the web page here. I'll give you the link at the end of the slide deck. But basically, it is a weekly update. It's freely available information on phishing emails. So it's like a central repository for phishing emails across the world. And you can see that this is an analysis taken towards the back end of March, 21st to the 28th of March. And if you look at the two tables on the right, the top table is telling us who the emails look like they're coming from. So it comes as no surprise is to see that Apple's on there, all these sorts of brands that they try and mimic to get people to do stuff. And then the bottom table relates to actually within that subject line, before you open up the email, what does that subject line say? And look at this and think about the cues, the psychology involved. Important. Your action, update, information, chase, ramping up the pressure, trying to make it appear like something that it's not. Here's an interesting question. So ask yourself the question, or just in general in life, are some people more vulnerable to phishing emails? Are there some of us that are more inherently vulnerable to being scammed? And there's been some research, quite interesting research again done in this area, considering things like age, gender, your familiarity with who's sending the email or who looks like the email is being sent from, thinking about spoofing. And it depends on how trusting we are. There's loads of different factors. But what concerns me is stress. So if you've got a time, either at home or at work, where you're going through a particular stressful period within your life, you are much more likely to be a victim of a scam, because your research has shown that your ability to spot phishing emails decreases the more stressed you are. So think about things like the end of the financial year, certain deadlines. If you look at the time of recording this, we've got the COVID situation going on. People's vulnerability to phishing emails is probably going to be more susceptible than what it might be. So what are some of the things that we can do to help us reduce our phishing vulnerability? At the bottom, I've put awareness. This is probably one of the most important things that you can do. You've got to raise awareness of phishing emails and scams, both at home and at work. Think about it. Within an organisation, our people our strongest asset or our weakest link? How confident are you that they're not just going to open up an email that says invoice with an attachment on it that says invoice, in the example that I gave earlier on? So one of the things that you can do is there's loads of good awareness, free awareness advice out there at the NCSC webpage, the link of which you'll find at the end of this blog. One of the other things you can do is you can use our Curious Frank cybersecurity undergraduates to come into an organisation to give an awareness session. They're really good. So they'll show you, like, here's a real life phishing email here. Here's some of the telltale signs that makes it so you can see that it's fraudulent. They're really good. Footprinting. Think about it. So what information is out there upon you or your organisation? You can get our Curious Frank students to do a report on that. You can ask them to go out and find out what information is freely available. It's what we call OSINT, an open source investigation, and they can present their findings to you. So you can maybe make some tweaks around your social media, things like that. They can come to that with some recommendations. Knowledge is power. Know what's out there. Know how that might be used against you in a phishing email. Testing. Why not get our students to deploy some phishing emails within your organisation to see who might click on the links, to see who might be vulnerable? Now, this is really, really important. We all have bad days. I've fallen victim to phishing emails in the past, and I'm sure I will in the future, because some of them are that good. It's important that people don't feel like they're being tricked or singled out when they're doing this. Actually, research has shown, and the National Cybersecurity Centre advocates cultures of openness, no blaming when it comes to phishing email. So what I would say is all of these three services here are not mutually exclusive. You could, as an example, say, right, we're going to do some phishing email testing within our organisation, let that campaign run, and then bespoke the awareness around your findings. All these things are important, and what it really does is it empowers your employees to be more confident in dealing with this stuff, both at work and at home. So in summary then, what have we talked about? We've talked about the impact of phishing and the types of phishing emails we're likely to encounter. We've discussed the three things that the fraudsters behind the phishing emails will likely want us to do. We've looked at the psychological tricks that they'll use to try and get us to do those three things. We've considered our employees' vulnerability to phishing emails and what can make them more susceptible. And we've looked at the things that we can do to try and help reduce our vulnerability to phishing emails. Remember, there are multiple parts to defeating phishing emails. They are technical things you can do. We've not covered those in this blog. We may do that in future. This is concentrating on the human firewall, if you want that analogy. Lastly, here are some great links to some information.